coming up.
You were a force of nature, and we'll never forget your cheeky smile.
The police commissioner's teenage son mowed down in a hit and run.
My baby and you always will be.
But from despair comes inspiration and compassion.
This is not a tough love experience. This is genuinely supporting these kids to find their own way.
Hello and welcome to Extra Minutes, the 60 Minutes podcast. I'm Adam Hegarty. I'm joined by my colleague, Tara Brown. Tara, good to see you.
Yes, you too.
Your story, heartbreaking, for lack of a better word. Of course, the tragic death of Charlie Stevens, the son of SA Police Commissioner Grant Stevens. I feel like South Australians would know Grant, or feel like they know Grant really well, but you saw a different side to a grieving father.
Oh, yeah. You know, he wasn't in uniform. He wasn't the commissioner, he was a grieving dad. And you're right, South Australians do know him because he was the face every day on their screens during COVID. He guided them through that. So I think they have a sense of knowing him and by extension his son Charlie and probably the entire family. And so when something awful happened, I think they really felt it.
You make the point in the story that Grant himself is used to grief. Like, he's normally the one, or his colleagues delivering this news. I mean, you'd be no stranger to grieving families as well with what we do. I mean, what struck you about Grant and also his wife, Emma, that has helped them deal with just this unimaginable tragedy for their family?
I don't know that they would say that they've been helped yet. I think it was 7 months ago. They're really struggling. I mean, they made it easy for me to talk to them because they're humorous, they're human, they're very normal, they're very genuine people and very welcoming at, you know, this most awful time. I think they have each other and they realise how important it is that they can lean on each other because they really are the two people who share this most common grief and tragedy, something that none of us are trained for. We don't know how to deal with this type of loss. So they have each other, and they have a big family, a warm, very warm family.
Yeah. You mentioned humour. You can tell that they're really leaning on that to start to help get through this.
Yeah, and they're honest about Charlie. You know, they call him a rat bag and, they call him a dickhead, or they tell me that, they said to me, we're always telling him not to be a dickhead. They understand who their son was and they're not frightened to, they're not trying to paint him into some sort of angel or something he wasn't. But he was a kid full of life, clearly.
And a kid too, right? You're 18. I mean, you mentioned how they've described him. It is just kids involved in this, but it's not just him. They also have extraordinary, sympathy and surprisingly forgiveness for the other very young man involved in this story.
Yeah, and in a way they see it as a double tragedy. I mean, they are so grief-stricken and they feel that loss so keenly and and they feel the absolute brunt of that. But they have sympathy and compassion and forgiveness, as you say, for the driver and who was 18, didn't have any drugs or alcohol in his system. The exact details of, how he came to actually hit Charlie are still unknown in the public domain. And because the driver has pleaded guilty to 2 charges, we won't actually hear those details unless witnesses come forward to explain what actually happened when this 18-year-old took the U-turn and somehow hit Charlie. And, I've been down there at night. It's dark. It's very quiet. There are very few street lights. You can only imagine what might have happened. It's hard to actually work out what happened, but if an accident was going to happen, I guess those conditions are right for that.
Yeah, pretty eerie. You weren't surprised at what happened there?
Well, it's hard without knowing all the full details of how a U-turn could end up in hitting somebody. But visibility is certainly the night we were there it was dark, very dark. But I don't know. And that will all come out to play once the sentencing has been decided later next month. Yeah.
Well, I guess one of the reasons we don't know is because the young driver has entered a plea deal through the court process. I mean, what was the reaction from Grant and his wife Emma, Charlie's parents, with that?
Possibly surprising for some, it was gratitude. Yeah. They're really grateful because their concern is not just for themselves but also for the three mates who were with Charlie that night. And if it was to go to trial, if the driver didn't plead guilty and it was going to go to trial, then they would be called as witnesses. The pain of that, the reliving of that night, is something that this family really wanted to avoid. And so they're really grateful that doesn't have to be run through again. They're very grateful that by admitting guilt to 2 charges that the driver has acknowledged some responsibility. They're very grateful for that. And they're also really grateful that that this won't be prolonged. If it went to trial, this would be going on and on, certainly on for longer than it will now. So, yeah, the gratitude was their major reaction. Yeah. Can you tell me how you do feel about a plea bargain being reached?
We're grateful that Duran has pleaded guilty. We think that's obviously, it gives us some understanding of his acceptance of his responsibility. But I think with what is left to occur in the court process, we'll just let that unfold.
One thing I noticed watching this story is that, and I might be crazy just to focus on this, but Grant refers to the driver by his first name. Did you get a sense that he was just really taking again a leadership role here, not trying to demonise the person who took his son's life?
Yes, I think so. I think it probably comes naturally to him because I think, as I said, they're very genuine. So if they're telling you that they don't feel hatred towards the driver, then that means they don't feel hatred towards the driver. But in those early days, the Commissioner came out and sort of said settle. I think that there was a sort of a mass, through grief, but an outpouring of anger. I think there was a fear that might even develop into a lynch mob type mentality. And so the word was of caution. Let's find out what happened, calling off the mob, really.
It's hard to think about, isn't it, where not only did he have to deal with his own grief, but he also had to take that community leadership role that he'd done so well up until that point.
Yeah, I think it must have been a huge challenge for him. And, as he said, he thought about retirement there for a little while. I mean, I guess every breath was hard to take in those early days. But Emma told him he wasn't welcome. Get back to work. I'll see you for dinner, not for lunch.
I could not help but laugh. You'd tear up watching a story, but then laugh at that moment when they're just a bickering couple. It's just obviously leaning on that as well, leaning on everything they can to try and get through something really awful.
Yeah, and the Commissioner says he's back 100% now. And, he said he's also probably protected by his team. They kind of massage when when things might be too difficult for him, but he gets up there and he talks about the road toll, he talks about young lives at risk, he does all that, and he does it grabbing hold of his son's ring, which he now wears. And so that's a reminder of a very personal loss. I guess it also gives him strength that there is, his message means something.
Do you think he's really conscious of that, even early days, that he can sadly use his grief to really get that message across, so whenever he's standing up in those press conferences, he can have that added impact of this happened to me, you need to sort out your behaviour on the roads?
Well, I think he hopes that that's the response from people hearing it. I mean, it means that to him. Again, he's very genuine, and now it has an added dimension of reality that nobody wants. They're not just words for him. He's lived it and he's living it. And I think he wants to save lives, very genuinely. I mean, he said to me something you raised earlier, this idea that as a police officer, it was his job to deliver, and is his job to deliver, very tragic news. He's a very empathetic person, and he's said that was always one of the hardest parts of the job. He just didn't realise, he thought he knew the impact it had, and he was very sympathetic for that and very respectful for the people he was telling that news to. But he said in reality he didn't know. He didn't know how it rips your guts out, how it breaks your heart. It does. You think you know. You just don't know that it does. It really does change your life in a split second.
It's like a lot of things, right? You really don't know until...
And you don't want to.
No, not this. Absolutely not. But they're trying to move it into a good and positive direction, aren't they? You spent some time with Operation Flinders. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, well, you're from South Australia. You should have warned me. You should have warned me. No, we went to the Flinders Ranges, which are, beautiful, but I don't know that I want to be dumped in that landscape and told to trek for 100 kilometres without any sort of, anywhere to sleep but on the ground, nowhere to eat but out of a, can. And it was freezing cold. But it's something that Grant... He's actually on the board of Operation Flinders, and in the massive outpouring of grief from the community, he and Emma asked if instead of flowers, which they already had so many bunches of, that people might donate instead. And the charity of their choice was Operation Flinders, and it's designed to help at-risk teens. And so these are really marginalised children, they're teenagers, marginalised from the rough end of town. Some of them are rough themselves, they've had drug abuse issues, they're victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, really harsh conditions. So they're then brought 700 kilometres from home. They're put into the wilderness with volunteer leaders. And really, they're testing their limits. They're learning to rely on each other. They're being listened to. They're being nurtured. And they've helped 10,000 children over 33 years. And in asking people to donate, the community responded by coughing up $220,000 already. So
good South Australians.
Yeah, well, clearly touched a heartstring. And the benefits are huge, for those kids. It costs quite a lot to put them through that program. And specifically in Charlie's name, they're going to build a flying fox, which seems to go with his adventurous character, his free and high-spiritedness. But yeah, they're going to build a flying fox in his name, plus, help other kids.
Yeah. Did you notice the impact, even the short time you spent there, that program was having on the kids who that were brought into the program to try and help them?
Yeah, I spoke to a 19-year-old who had been there as a participant and has come back as a mentor, and she just said, you create bonds that you never expect to and have endured since she was there originally, but also you're introduced to people who, like you've never met before. People who show an interest and who care, which might seem like really obvious, basic things. You'd think and hope most teenagers have that, but many don't. And even within the week that... So the program runs only for 8 days. So the results are amazing given the shortness of the time. Absolutely. But within that 8-day, the group that was within that 8-day period, you saw kids who would never have been given leadership roles, given the role of leading the team. Making decisions on where to go, how to read maps, who's signing tasks, being given responsibility that they probably have never, ever had before. And so, there are lots of rough edges, I'm sure, that still had to be ironed out, but they seem to be lapping it up.
Yeah, it's such a lovely way for Grant and Emma to start healing too, right? Seeing that, what happened to Charlie is heartbreaking, but it's helping other people. But eventually, I guess the spotlight moves on, as it always inevitably does. What does the future hold for Grant and Emma?
Well, the positives of at the heart of your question, that they believe for Operation Flinders that many more children will be helped, children who will never know, or teenagers who will never even know who Charlie is. And they're happy with that. He still lives on because that program runs in his name, and there are a number of kids who are going to be helped because of him. But I think more generally for them, sentencing is a big thing. That, it's another sort of challenge to get through. And then, I don't know.
It's hard.
I don't think they know. Yeah, the bedroom's been left the way it was by Charlie. beer cans,
Bit messy. Yeah.
wardrobe doors open, clothes on the floor. And his mates come back and sit in there. He's got a couch in there. They sit in there, have a few drinks. It's a really nice part of the Stevens life, I think. And these young men, show up any time of day or night.
As young men do.
As young men do. Then they share memories and they, talk about Charlie and they drink Charlie's dad's beer and they give Mum a hard time. And I think Emma and Grant love it.
Yeah, absolutely. It always strikes me, you deal with a lot of families going through tragedy like this, and they do often keep things the same, and you wonder whether that can be difficult to see, but for Grant and Emma, it's a really healthy and happy thing to keep things as they were.
Well, I don't know, and I don't think they know because they, asked if it gave them comfort. They're beautiful paintings of Charlie on the wall and photos and his room, and they said sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. He's all around them, and I think that is comforting, but it's also a reminder of their loss. And I think it's just, I know it's a cliche, but I think it is just the time, responding to how time affects your grief, because I don't know how you can know what to expect, know how long that will take,
Yeah, well, Tara, it's an incredibly sad story, but hopefully an element of being a bit uplifting, showing that, even in their grief, they're banding together and trying to move forward as a family, but also as a community.
Yeah, I think their strength is pretty inspiring. Their humour is.
Something we can all learn from a little.
Exactly.
Yeah, all right, Tara, well, pleasure. As always, of course, as we said, you can catch Tara's full story on our YouTube channel as well as 9Now.